All right. Well, let's get underway then. First of all, as I said, for those of you standing in the back, if you'd rather sit, there's still a few seats up here, not many though. But if you'd rather sit there, you can go into that back room. You'll see the slides. There's screens back there. There's the audio, so you're welcome to do that. It might be a bit more comfortable. Very first thing I'd like you to do, if you don't mind, is just give yourself a big round of applause. This is a fantastic turnout on an important issue. And way to go, all of you. I expected all the Canucks fans to be here. Maybe they're all Canucks fans, Bill. We have a full agenda for you today, and it's we should be finished by 9 o'clock. That's my goal, is to have everybody out of here by 9. My name's Ken Donnelly. I'm with Beyond Attitude Consulting, and I'm a consultant doing some work for the Community Monitoring Committee, doing some work on consultation, community engagement, and that sort of thing. And I'm going to be your master of ceremonies tonight. Now, I just want to go through the agenda. So there's the welcome and the purpose of the meeting, which I'll go through in a second. We have some remarks from Elizabeth Salton, who is the acting chair of the Community Monitoring Committee. She's going to tell you a bit about the Community Monitoring Committee. Councillor Reg Rankin is going to come up, and followed by Councillor Steve Adams for some brief remarks. And we put brief remarks up there just to make sure people are brief. Isn't that funny, eh? And then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about, to give you an update on what's going on the Otter Lake issue. And then we have Scott Kyle is going to come up. Scott's with Dylan. I'll introduce him later. But he's going to do a peer review, or present their peer review on the Stantec report. And then we're going to throw it open to questions and answers and try and answer as many questions as possible. I want you to understand that the reason that we've pulled this meeting together, and we pulled it together fairly quickly, is that we really want to try to assist the community and understand what's going on. Things are moving very rapidly. There's a lot of change going on. You've probably seen decisions being made at council, for instance, to go with public consultation. And we've also seen I'll explain later, but the scope of the public consultation has changed. And then, of course, there's been some important letters coming out of Province House that have a pretty big impact on this as well. So my goal here is that when everybody leaves, you have a full understanding of what's going on, because it's admittedly very confusing. So, all right. And I should say, I'm going to say it now because I'm concerned that I might not say it properly later. It's important to understand that when Scott Kyle is making a presentation on behalf of Dylan, and he's reviewing the Stantec report. Now, the Community Monitoring Committee has a budget of $65,000 a year. Community Monitoring Committee, and Elizabeth will be talking about this, but it was set up by Halifax Regional Municipality in order to be a watchdog over the landfill operations. And there is a budget that was established in the charter that set up the Community Monitoring Committee, and there's $65,000 that is to be made available through HRM to help the CMC do its job of overseeing the landfill. And the CMC requested that it have the funds that it would need, approximately $20,000 we expected, in order to do a peer review of the Stantec report. Staff at HRM said no. They would not allow that. Now, whether or not they should be even saying no to a request for to access that $65,000 is a question. But even if CMC tried to argue with them to get it, it would have taken too long. We did find out that the Mirror group that operates the landfill, they were having Dylan review the Stantec report. And we talked to them, and they said, if you want, we can have Scott come up, and Scott can do a presentation for the community. So our preference would have been to have a completely independent review done and paid for by the CMC through the funds that are allocated to us, but that was not possible. So we've done the next best thing is to get a review done by, to get a presentation on the review done by Dylan. Okay? So with that, I'd like to ask Elizabeth Salton to come up. Elizabeth is the acting chair for the Community Monitoring Committee, and many people will remember her as a past warden of Halifax County. Elizabeth, please give her a hand.
Thank you very much. I'm so happy to see so many people. That is just terrific that you turned out for this meeting. We're really pleased to see you. So you know that Jack Mitchell is the chair of the Community Monitoring Committee. Everybody knows Jack Mitchell. He's away on a family trip, long planned. Otherwise, he would certainly be here. I'm his stand-in. So the Community Monitoring Committee, as Ken's just been saying, has existed since 1999. We don't look that old, but we've been in business since 1999. That's when HRM adopted its integrated solid waste resource management strategy. And that's when Otter Lake was designated as the new landfill site and the waste processing facility. So we started, when it was adopted and approved by HRM. So the Community Monitoring Committee, we sometimes call it CMC. We are not monitoring the community, we are monitoring the landfill. The Community Monitoring Committee has a current membership of 13, and many of them are here tonight, so I'm going to ask them to stand up because I want you to know who they are. Some of you may know who they are, but if you don't, this is your chance to put a name to a face and understand who's on this committee. The committee is set up to be a mix of area residents, of municipal councillors, and of HRM appointees. And I'd like to introduce those who are here. So I'm going to start at the top. We know Jack Mitchell isn't here, but he is the chair. Next to him is the vice chair, Bob Angus. Bob Angus, who ordinarily probably would be doing what I'm doing, but he's been away and we weren't sure he was going to be back in time. So Bob Angus, if you turn around then they can see your face, maybe, that would be a good idea. Okay, thank you. Next, Murray Power, who comes from Hubli. Murray Power, thank you. Tom Robertson from Hubli too. Tom, thank you. Mike Bessigno, who comes from Timberley. Lindsay Gates from Timberley. Thank you. Peter Lund from Tantallon. Andrew Giles from Halifax. I'm on the list. I spent 40 years in St. Margaret's Bay, but I do now live in Halifax. Please forgive me. That sometimes happens. Councillor Steve Adams. Councillor Russell Walker is on our committee. Not sure if Russell's here. Councillor Reg Rankin. And Mayor Savage is a member of our committee. A member of the committee. He has been to a number of meetings as well. And our executive director, the man who sends the emails and organizes this, is Ken Meach. Ken has some connections with various governments as well. Okay, so I just want to be brief and tell you what the Community Monitoring Committee was set up to be. I think Ken has said that already. It's meant to be independent of HRM. It reports both to the community and to the HRM Council. We report to both, can report to both. And it is a watchdog, as Ken was saying. It's a watchdog for the community to ensure that the Otter Lake facility functions as the original agreement required. The agreement was between the stakeholders, the citizens, who said, on these conditions, we will agree to a landfill in this area. So that's the original agreement. And HRM agreed to it, and we're here to hold them to it. So like any good watchdog, we're reacting to the current threats to the Otter Lake operation, and they're proposed by the consultants review commissioned by the HRM Council. You've read about the Stantec report, that's what I'm talking about. Their proposals for how to achieve efficiencies, and as they like to say, evolve the landfill to a less expensive operation. We're especially concerned about the possible elimination of the front-end processing facility and the waste stabilization facility at Otter Lake. That's a major concern. Together, these ensure that the landfill will not be a hazard to the environment or to the communities that surround it. And it is not on the keep list for the Stantec report. So on behalf of the Community Monitoring Committee, I want to assure you that we're fighting to protect those parts of the solid waste system, like the front-end processing and the waste stabilization, which are legally committed protections for the communities of the area. As Ken said, we're going to be sharing additional information tonight that we think is missing from the consultant's report that was commissioned by HRM Council. To wind this up, the Community Monitoring Committee intends to be part of HRM's community consultation process, which is meant to begin sometime this summer. What a lovely time to have a community consultation process. That's very clever, but we are going to be there, and we hope you're going to be there too. We are going to turn out for any community consultation that gets scheduled. HRM Council really needs to know how we feel, and especially it needs to know how the community feels about the promises that were made to the local areas about Otter Lake. They need to know how you feel about those promises potentially being broken. We hope to see you again later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. And next, can you please give a warm welcome to Councillor Ridge Rankin.
Welcome, everyone. I know that my colleague councillors and the mayor will certainly take notice of what a crowd we have this evening. And on behalf of my community, I just want to take a few moments to thank and recognize some people that have helped us gain, I think, major achievements, despite my Halifax Council at this time. And let me begin by recognizing our friend, our member of the legislation, the Honourable Bill Estabrook. Bill. I know that Bill has to leave at about 8:30, but thank you for being here, Bill. Let me say that I have met with Bill on this issue a number of times, and he has been a constant ally in this cause, such that I do not hesitate in stating that with his work behind the scenes, that he was instrumental in having the Minister for Environment state very clearly that while Halifax Council may apply, they will not be having any changes at the landfill relating to the protection. So I would give credit to Mr. Bill Estabrook for that achievement. In addition, I want to publicly acknowledge all the MLAs for unanimous support. Now, how frequent is that, Bill, that you would get unanimous support on a substantial issue? I mean, it might be the Queen's birthday, unanimous, but this is substantial achievement. And so, I want to also personally thank all the MLAs. I was down to thank the minister, your minister. Also, the leaders of the Liberal Party, Stephen Neal, leader of the PC Party, Jamie Bailey, in unequivocal language. If Mr. Butts, staff, or any councillors held a notion that possibly after an election there might be a change in attitude, well, that was dismissed. Each and all of the leaders stated clearly there will not be any change in the protections for that landfill. But perhaps most importantly, I want to thank the many ordinary citizens that made themselves extraordinary citizens by all the emails, phone calls, and showing up at committee meetings, at council, for without which that support, I'm sure that the House of Assembly would not have taken notice. And it certainly helped myself and my colleague, Councillor Adams, as well, councillors may be in the room, Councillors Matt Whitman, and our other friend, Councillor Hensby, who was on the side of our motion. And also I want to recognize Peter Kelly, who's back there, former mayor. He's come forward in support. And so I want to recognize that as well. So with that, I just want to thank you so much for that support.
Thank you very much, Councillor Rankin. And Deputy Mayor Rankin, thank you very much. And next, Councillor Steve Adams. Please welcome.
Thank you, everybody. So Mr. Estabrooks has to leave at 8:30. He's actually a closet Montreal Canadian fan. By the way, anyone wearing a Montreal hat, we'd really appreciate it if you took it off. I'm going to just put out a couple numbers here this evening. The number 4, that's the number of councillors that supported our motion to stop this affront to democracy. Myself, Councillor Rankin, Councillor Whitman, Councillor Hensby. 25. That's the number of years that was written in this contract that this landfill was scheduled to close. 15. That's the number of meters that this report that we're supposed to be consulting on, that's the height that they want to increase the landfill as it now sits. 17 to 23. That's how many years they want to extend the operation. One of the most important numbers, 100. Those are the jobs that will be lost if this goes through. As Elizabeth said earlier, the CMC was a watchdog for the landfill. Well, the CMC has now turned into a watchdog for council, and that's wrong. I was talking to a couple friends earlier this evening. They said, wait till the next meetings. You wait to see how many people are there. Well, if Councillor Rankin and I have our way, there won't be any more meetings because there won't be a need for it. As Councillor Rankin said, we have support from the Minister of Environment. We have support from the leader of the Liberal Party and the leader of the PCs. And unanimous support in the legislature that brought a motion forward that no changes will be made at the landfill. That's clear. So I'm trying to figure out, why are we here this evening? We're creatures of the province. They make the rules, we follow them. Last week I put forward a notice of motion, and we'll do a few more numbers here. Think of the number 10. That's how long it takes to site a new landfill. 10 years. This is 2013. That is scheduled to close in 2023. It's time we start looking for a new landfill, because if Councillor Rankin and I have our way, this landfill is going to be closing in 2023. So, ladies and gentlemen, I really do, I hope I see you again, but not at a meeting to discuss this landfill. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Adams. So we've got 7:22. We're in pretty good shape here. I'm going to get on to some of the updates here. What we want to try and do, as I said earlier, I'm just going to repeat it because some people have come in since, is we want you to leave here with a pretty good, well, a solid understanding of what's going on, what the situation is with the recommendations from the Stantec report, from the For the Councillor Adams was just mentioning and Deputy Mayor Rankin also mentioned the letters from the leaders of the parties and the letter from Minister Beliveau just saying, hey, this closing the FEP and the WSF just ain't on. So we want to try and provide as much clarity as possible. And it might only be clear until tomorrow because this is changing so rapidly. But at least when you leave here, you should understand where we are. So this is a question that everybody keeps asking me at Sobeys. Sometimes it isn't the hell, but it's close. But people are stopping me everywhere I go now, and they're saying, what is going on? The last 2 basketball games that my daughters had, I've spent explaining to people around me what's going on. So thank you so much for coming out, and there's a whole bunch of other people who probably didn't make it today, but are no doubt concerned. I'm going to talk to you about some of these current issues. I'm going to talk to you about staff ignoring the community commitment that was made. Scott Carl's going to mention it a little bit in his presentation, but I'm holding a written commitment here from HRM that was signed by the clerk, and it says that there will be a waste stabilization facility, front-end processing facility, and it'll be there for all of the time that the Otter Lake landfill exists. It's a written document. And I can tell you that when I went around and talked to some of the councillors, and some of those councillors, of course, weren't on council at the time, they didn't know this existed. The staff never told them. So there's, I'm going to talk to you a bit about that. I'm going to talk to you about, or Scott is actually going to talk to you about the Stantec report and the recommended changes, and I'm going to hit those again when he's done. I'm going to briefly talk about the peer review by SNC Lavalin, because what we hear from staff at HRM is that, okay, well, yeah, you had problems with the Stantec report, but we had another consultant look at it, and they blessed it, you know. I guess a new pope would have done that, but it's just that's not on. It's they looked at different issues, and I'm going to explain to you why that's not simply a blessing of the Stantec change or Stantec recommendations. I'm going to talk to you about what the status is with council right now. With respect to what the decisions that they've made, because there's some confusion. I'm going to talk to you about the status with the province, which has all been made pretty clear already tonight. And then I want to talk to you about the upcoming public consultations, what the situation is there, and what you can expect. All right? So the first point is staff ignoring the community commitment. As I said, at the time when the landfill was created, there was a written commitment made with what is called the Halifax Waste Resource Society. And in that commitment, it sets up the Community Monitoring Committee and its budget and its requirements. One of the things that the Community Monitoring Committee has a responsibility to do is to have a meeting like this in order to help the community understand what's happening. That's part of the responsibility that CMC has. CMC also has a responsibility to go to council and give them the input that we're hearing from the community. So the agreement between HRM and the Waste Resource Society it also says that there's only 3 kinds of waste that can go into the landfill. And the easiest way I can explain that is, one is inert materials. So I tell people that an inert material, for instance, would be like a running shoe or like my shoe here. It's not a running shoe, but a dress shoe. So that would be an inert material because you wouldn't expect it to break down. The second type is residual materials. It's a bit of a catch-all, and what it refers to is if some organic material, for instance, something that really shouldn't be going into the landfill, but it's in a small amount and maybe attached to something else and goes through, well, that's reasonable. For instance, if I had gum stuck to this shoe, threw it in the garbage, then that residual material, the gum would be residual material. The third material, and the most important one for our discussion, is stable material. And stable material is organic material that's gone through the waste stabilization facility. So those are the only 3 things that can go into that landfill as part of that agreement. And that means that raw organics can't go through, can't bypass the FEP, can't bypass the WSF and go straight to the landfill. even though that's what Stantec is recommending and what staff seem to be hell-bent on achieving. So that's one thing. All of that is in that agreement. It's a written document. It was signed by HRM, and it was expected to be enforced as long as that facility was in place. Now, the second thing is the Community Stakeholder Committee. Now, I facilitated all of those meetings with the Community Stakeholder Committee back in the mid-90s when we developed the waste management strategy and cited this landfill. And this landfill, when it was cited, it was not just citing a landfill, as the hole in the ground, as I call it. It was citing a front-end processing facility, a waste stabilization facility, and an RDF, residual disposal facility. I'm not called upon to say that one very often. The residual disposal facility, or the landfill. So the CSC did not cite just a landfill. It cited a facility that had all three components. And there were times during the consultations, and some of the councillors will remember, that the councillors started looking at the cost of putting this FEP and the WSF in. And they were thinking, and from time to time a councillor might say, gee, this is kind of expensive. I wonder if we should do this. And at the next council meeting, the council chambers would be flooded with CSC members. And the message was, if you don't build all three and don't operate all three, then Otter Lake is not the site. We're removing that site. So to take those out now, frankly, is a bait and switch. It's a bait and switch. There's no two ways about it. The contract with Mirror is to operate all three facilities. It's not three separate contracts to operate one and the other and the other. It's to operate all three together, because that's what the system is. And HRM sought an operating permit, and they have an operating permit for all three facilities. The operating permit from the Department of Environment says that that all the waste has to go through the FEP and go through the WSF, and the FEP and the WSF have to be in place just like the landfill portion. And that's what Minister Beliveau affirmed in his letter recently, that said those facilities will remain in place until that landfill is closed in 2023. And finally, there's a ban on organics. The province has a ban on organics. So to close the front-end processing facility and waste stabilization facility would be knowingly breaking the regulations on burial of organics. It's a step backwards. A step backwards in environmental protection. It's a step backward in community protection. I was talking to somebody today, and they were saying how in the Stantec report, they said they went around and they looked across the country to see what the best practices were. And they couldn't find any other municipalities doing the front-end processing and the waste stabilization facility. So they said it's not a best practice. That's crap. What they have in the other places they have is common practice. You can't go back and say the people that aren't doing it like we're doing it here have the best practice, and so we have to regress and close the facilities that are the best part of this process, this system that we have, a system that people have come from all over the world to see. So we have the best practice here now. Others may have a common practice, but we have the best practice here. So we've got these are community commitments that were made. There are also commitments to the province and other regulators, but these are the commitments that were made. And I can tell you, because I've looked through all of the documents, I've read all the documents, and the report that the council voted recently to make public, which was the February 5th, I believe, in-camera report, there's nothing in there about these commitments. Staff wrote a big, long, lengthy report, but it was all about Stantec and all the savings that they can have, these efficiencies. And they didn't say anything about these agreements that were made by HRM with the local community. So this is now Gord Helm, who's the solid waste manager for HRM. Only 2 years ago, he had a presentation. He was trying to get clear bags in place. And so he was really keen to show how important it was to get organics out of the landfill and get it away from the Otter Lake facility, because this is his slide, not mine. I stole this. off of his presentation, and his presentation is still on the Halifax website. If you go to our Facebook page, you can find a link to it. And this is Gordon Helm, solid waste manager, only 2 years ago, and this was the first slide after the title. And he was asserting the fundamental community commitment that HRM has to keep organics and other banned materials out of the landfill. The development of the Otter Lake, well, the FEP and waste stabilization facility to eliminate organics from the landfill. Man, he was really into that fundamental community commitment when he was trying to do something else. But now they seem to have forgotten that commitment. This is from their website as well. This is still on. I just pulled this off today. I was really surprised it's still there. The front-end processor facility. This is under the description of the waste management system. And what they say is that the FEP allows for identification and removal of material that should not be going to landfill. This is HRM's words. Should not be going to landfill. The next one, the waste stabilization facility. Screened material from the FEP is transferred to the WSF where it moves and is decomposed in 18 to 21 days. Now they're saying that, and the Stantec report says it's fundamentally unchanged. It just dries it a little bit. Well, when he was trying to show how important this was to keep this stuff out, he said the material left at the end of this process is a dryer-like fluff, which then goes to the landfill. This is on the website today. And then here, diversion from landfill, how important it is. Look at that. The processing, stabilizing of waste comes at a cost. However, it is done for the protection of the local community and the environment. So they're still saying that. I guess it depends on who the audience is and what they say. So I'm going to come back in a little bit and I'm going to talk about a few other things. But I'm going to get Scott Kyle to come up. Now Scott, as I said before, I'm going to say it again because it's really important and some people have come in. The CMC would much have preferred to have its own independent review done of the Stantec report. We were unable to do that because staff at HRM would not free up the money that CMC is allocated to CMC to do with as it pleases, but they have control of it. And they said, no, we won't let you have an independent review of the Stantec report. So the next best thing we could do is we found out that Mirror, the operator, was having Dylan, and Dylan has worked at the, Scott will mention this, but Dylan has worked at the landfill for a long, long time, that they were having a review. And so Mirror kindly said, well, if you can't get an independent one, we can make Scott available to come to your meeting. So we really appreciate that from people at Mirror. So Scott Kyle, he's a civil engineer and he's a partner at Dillon Consulting. He joined in 1988. He's worked primarily in the areas of solid waste management and municipal infrastructure design, completing projects on behalf of municipal, industrial, institutional government, and international sector clients. Please welcome Scott Kyle.
Okay, thanks very much, Ken, and welcome everyone. I'm surprised there's this many people here when the Habs are going to get back in the series tonight, but nonetheless. So to get underway, I'll give you a bit of additional background on my firm and myself. I work for Dillon Consulting Limited, and our company was founded back in 1946. We have about 650 employees at the current time and 17 offices from Vancouver to St. John's. In terms of Nova Scotia roots, they go back to the days of Hugh Porter. Some of you might remember Hugh. He started up a firm called H.J. Porter and Associates in 1975, and we subsequently joined the Dillon group of families in 1985. In terms of waste management experience, we have extensive experience, not just here in HRM and in Nova Scotia, but also across Canada. And again, my name's Scott Kyle, civil engineer, partner with Dillon. 25 years, believe it or not, at the end of this month, since I graduated from Tons, working with Dillon and primarily in the field of solid waste management here in Nova Scotia and across Canada, and in fact, a little bit of work down in the Caribbean. The involvement of Dillon with Otter Lake goes back to the very beginning. We were involved in the initial siting and investigation of that particular property. I remember being on a four-wheeler and going through the woods before it was even developed, and we've been involved with it since that time in terms of the engineering and environmental monitoring. So I'll describe briefly Dylan's engagement as it relates to the review of the Stantec document. It was specifically to take a look at the document that was issued by Stantec in January 2013 entitled Waste Resource Strategy Update. And as Ken has pointed out, that review was conducted on behalf of our client, Mirror Nova Scotia, the entity that we've worked for throughout the life of the development of the Otter Lake site. Now, for today's presentation, really consists of three primary parts. I'll start off with a brief background on the events that led up to the call and then the issuing of the Stantec report. For those that aren't familiar with the Otter Lake facility, and there might be a few here that aren't as familiar with it as I am, I'll give a bit of a primer in terms of the overall key attributes and characteristics of the site, how it sits in regard to other communities and its infrastructure. And finally, the meat of the presentation will be the highlights of Dylan's review of the Stantec document. So some background on the Stantec report. Back in July 2012, Halifax Regional Municipality issued a request for proposals, and they were looking for a consultant to conduct really a comprehensive review of HRM's solid waste resource strategy, and it included everything, the system, the programs, the costs, etc. Stantec Consulting were selected through a competitive process to conduct that review, and they issued their findings in a report at the end of January 2013, and it was subsequently posted on the HRM website. Now, just as a point of clarity, and Ken's mentioned this, there was another report commissioned by HRM, and it was to conduct a peer review of the Stantec document, and that was awarded to SNC Lavalin, and they issued their document in April 2013. So, the presentation focus for today, as I mentioned, is the 2013 Stantec document. It doesn't refer to the SNC document. And my review is based on an initial review of the report and all the supporting documents, both ones referenced and ones that weren't referenced within the Stantec report. I should confirm that I have not had an opportunity to discuss my comments with the authors of the Stantec report. And as mentioned, we have begun an initial review of the SNC Lavalin peer review, but we won't be going into those initial findings tonight. Okay, now on to the Otter Lake site. So this is an aerial view, courtesy of Google Earth, of the area surrounding the Otter Lake facility. We have Highway 103 just running to the north of the Otter Lake site, connecting the city to the South Shore. Exit 3 and the interchange was actually built originally to provide access to the Otter Lake site, and of course, since it's become a heavily used piece of infrastructure for folks wanting to get into the communities on the north of the highway. Here's the Otter Lake site itself. You can see the developed areas in terms of the completed landfill and active landfill. That makes up the bulk of the footprint. To give you an idea of how large this area is that I'm showing on the figure, from one end of the orange arrow to the other on the scale diagram, that's about 3 miles or 5 kilometers. So the communities, and several of them were represented today and mentioned in terms of the committee. We have Timberlea to the north of Highway 103, Lakeside Beachville, just a little bit off to the east. On the Prospect Road, we have Goodwood, and further to the south, Hatchet Lake. And then finally up in the southwest corner, we have the community of Hubli. One thing worthwhile pointing out, and I'll talk about it a little bit later with regards to the liner system at the Otter Lake site, we do have the 9 Mile River, a very substantial watercourse that runs directly to the west of the Otter Lake site. And it ultimately discharges about 10 kilometers away to the salt water in Shad Bay. One item I'd like to point out is how close this waste management facility is to the downtown core of Halifax, and really to the center of generation in terms of where waste is generated within HRM. What you'll often find for municipalities across Canada is they really try, in many cases, to hide away their disposal facility. They try to get it as far away from people as possible because they know about some of those traditional nuisance issues that you have to deal with, and they don't want people to be exposed to them. Well, here we have an instance of a site that's located very close to the city, very close to development, and development that's continued to grow over the last number of years. And because of the facilities that were established there, and I'm really talking about the FEP and the WSF, there was confidence that it could be situated there and be a good neighbor to the surrounding communities, and I think that's quite unique. Now here's an aerial shot of the Otter Lake site to give you a little more detail on the infrastructure, and you'll see some of the items that we're talking about here this evening. The main access road that connects the site back to Highway 103 and Exit 3. The scale house, so all loads, all materials that arrive at the site have to first go by the scale house to be weighed and initially inspected. Materials then proceed to the front-end processor, so it's basically a tipping floor, an enclosed tipping floor where loads can be placed on the floor, inspected, and start the initial phases of the processing exercise that occurs within the FEP and the WSF. WSF, just the next system in the chain, and that's where the organic fraction essentially gets composted. It's the finer grain portion that goes through a composting step to be stabilized prior to direction to the residuals disposal facility, or as we engineers like to call them, landfills. And you can see it here, it occupies the majority of the property. You can see just above the label here, there's a cell under construction in this photo. That's the actual line cell being built, being prepared for the completion of the existing cell. You can see the dark color, that's the liner system being installed. For areas of the site that are under construction or exposed soil surfaces, that water is directed to sedimentation control ponds, similar to what you would do at a construction site, to knock out that sediment load before it's discharged to the environment. All liquid that contacts the waste in the RDF is directed via a pipe system from the liner collection system to a tank, leachate tank. It's then picked up by a tanker truck and then directed to one of HRM's wastewater treatment facilities. Landfill gas flare. So at the site, there is a pipe system within the cells that captures gas that's generated as the material breaks down, and it's directed to this flare, where it is then combusted and basically converted from methane, which is a very high greenhouse gas impact, to CO2, which has a much reduced greenhouse gas impact. And finally, as I mentioned, adjacent to the site, we have the 9 Mile River, very close to our sedimentation control ponds. So back to the Stantec report. I should be more specific in terms of what we focused on, because it wasn't really the report in its entirety. There were 3 sections in particular that we scrutinized based on our experience at Otter Lake. First of all, section 3 of the report, entitled Otter Lake Waste Processing and Disposal Facility. We spent specific time reviewing that for obvious reasons. The next section focused on the landfill design and the liner and the operations of the landfill. And then section 5 from the Stantec report talked about this concept of a regional waste resource campus, and I'll get into some detail on that in a little bit. Now, before I get into my 7 items of concern, which is the bulk of the remainder of the presentation, I can say that there were some themes to the concerns that I identified as we went through the report. The first one, and Ken's talked about it, is what I would call a limited understanding of the historical context of the waste management program here in HRM. There was very little reference to a lot of the anxiety and problematic, contentious meetings that led up to what we ultimately achieved in HRM, as if that really didn't matter, or it happened a long time ago. And I think, I remember that, and I'm not that old, but nonetheless, a lot of those meetings that were attended by many of us were very difficult and not ones we want to revisit. Generally within the Stantec report, and it was a concern as an engineer, is that there was a noted lack of supporting references or definition of assumptions. There were a lot of opinions presented and some numbers, but where these opinions and numbers came from wasn't very well defined. And finally, and this is something as a civil engineer that I have to be particularly mindful about, is recognizing that when you're talking about waste management, it's not just technical solutions and the issues of cost. There's the issue of the social challenges and political challenges, and they tend to be the most important. Those themes are very lightly mentioned within the Stantec report, the social and political side of waste management infrastructure. So, Really, the foundation of the Stantec assessment is that the FEP and WSF isn't necessary. And they based that evaluation on what I've called an incorrect definition of the intended role of the FEP WSF. Stantec relied on what I've called a superseded or no longer applicable definition of what the FEP WSF was to achieve. They went back to the original CSC strategy from 1995, where it did talk about the idea that the FEP WSF would provide some sort of a return on investment. It would generate revenue, and that would be through the sale of marketable recyclables and compost. However, in May 1996, in a staff report that also is still online, the actual objectives of the FEP WSF were revised, and I'll put it up here verbatim. It said in that staff report, unlike the previous version, this facility will not generate revenue and related expenses through additional diversion. Its system role is limited to sorting inert materials, as Ken mentioned, that can go directly to the RDF and stabilizing the remaining compostable material in the WSF. This whole notion of being a going concern or providing a return on investment was not mentioned in the revised definition of the FEP WSF performance objectives. And this performance objective, as Ken has pointed out, was carried forward both into the agreement, the 1997 agreement with HRM and Mirror. It was carried forward in the Citizens Agreement, the CSC or the Waste Society Agreement in 1999, and it was also carried forward in its operating approval with Nova Scotia Environment, very clearly stated. And really the foundation requirement was only processed waste, stabilized waste, to be delivered to the RDF. Next item that I think is quite important, and it's a bit of an underpinning, and again, Ken has laid out the groundwork for me here on this one as well, is what I've referred to as an inconsistent characterization of the current mixed waste stream. So Stantec put forward the argument that there have been significant changes in the mixed waste stream in HRM since the facilities were initially opened 13 years ago. Essentially, what they claim is that residents and businesses are doing the right thing. As a group, they are segregating those organics, keeping recyclables and banned materials out of the mixed waste stream, and for that reason, we really don't need the FEP WSF any longer. Well, as Ken mentioned a few moments ago, HRM staff put forward the exact opposite argument about 2 years ago, and it was in support of a clear bag proposal that they put forward for mixed waste materials. In those reports, staff stated that there were large quantities of recyclables and organics continuing to arrive at the FEP. They provided a series of very compelling, provocative tipping floor photographs of mixed loads of organics and recyclables, you name it, arriving at the FEP mixed in with the black bags. And they even provided an estimate of the amount of compostable and recyclable material that was arriving at the FEP that should be diverted elsewhere to proper facilities, and they said it was about 62,000 tons per year. HRM's tonnage data also seems to support the notion that really the waste stream hasn't changed that much in the last 12 or 13 years. There have been modest changes at Otter Lake and at the materials recovery facility at Bears Lake and at the 2 composting operations, but as this next graph demonstrates, they have truly been modest changes. So this is a graph prepared from HRM's own data that shows the change in waste arriving at the different facilities in the 12-year period of 2000, 2001, from 2012 to 2013. So the top line is the mixed waste line, and that's the material that's arriving at the FEP. The next line down is the organics line. So those are the compostable organics that have been arriving at the 2 composting facilities that serve HRM, the New Era facility here in Goodwood, and then the Miller facility in Burnside. And the bottom line are recyclables. So those are the curbside, the blue bag recyclables that are being directed to the Miller MRF in Bears Lake. You see a little peak here around 2005, 2006, and based on my understanding of the waste system in HRM, I think what happened at that point is HRM sensibly started ensuring that C&D materials were directed away from the costly, in terms of landfill space, Otter Lake facility, and directed to C&D management facilities located elsewhere in the municipality, using that airspace more sensibly. And you can see once that started, the mixed waste line started to come back down. So in terms of a big change over time, well, as you can see, over that 12-year period, the lines are relatively flat. And based on the arguments put forward by Stantec in their report, you would expect that mixed waste line to be heading down and to the right, and the other two lines to be heading up and to the right. But in fact, the data doesn't support that. Now, I promised you some photos, and I too stole these from Gordon's presentation from March 2011. And this is to give a sense of the type of material that arrives on the tipping floor. This obviously is a mixed load of cheese and meat and other products along with some paper. That must have been quite a party. It might have been after the Bruins won the cup last time, I'm not sure, but we have a large number of redeemable beverage containers and bags mixed in that load. Again, more organics in a mixed load. Maybe from a pizza place. We look at tomato cans and LDPE plastic in the background. And then finally, a lot of produce, perhaps from a supermarket. So again, a real inconsistency about the state of the waste stream, and therefore calling into question this notion that the FEP WSF is no longer needed. The gatekeeper role. So because all waste arrives at the FEP and is inspected, I'd argue that it provides a pretty critical role to ensuring that people have an incentive to divert materials from their black bag. So as Ken mentioned, in Nova Scotia, what really drives a lot of the activities that HRM and other municipalities are involved in are the material bans. And the Nova Scotia government was particularly progressive when they got these bans in place back in the 1990s. A lot of other provinces across Canada have continued to kind of meander in this respect. You know, do the best you can, try to compost, try to recycle, but don't knock yourself out. In Nova Scotia, they basically said, forget making judgment calls on this. These materials are banned. And in doing so, they've come up with an explicit list of materials, compostables, recyclables, e-waste, tires, corrugated cardboard. It's a long list that is banned from landfill. So municipalities are obliged to put systems in place to make that happen. So with the FEP component, where that waste is placed on a tipping floor, there is a very advanced and ideal opportunity to review loads to make sure that they don't have these prohibited materials within. And it's a role that the folks at MIR take pretty seriously in terms of making sure that people who don't abide by the rules are held accountable. So from 2008 to 2012, there were an annual average of 612 warnings provided to collectors and 40 out-and-out rejections. And in the case of a rejection, the implications are pretty significant if you're a collector. Basically, if your load is rejected, the load is placed back on your vehicle, it has to be removed from the site, the prohibited materials have to be removed from the load, and then you have to return back to Otter Lake. So if you're in the business of time and money, that the collection industry is, that's a pretty expensive consequence to showing up with a mixed load. So what does that do? Well, it makes the collectors doubly interested in encouraging their clients to do the right thing at the point of generation, to have the right containers, to be separating organics and recyclables, and to educate their clients. Now, without that gatekeeper role, without that concern that we're going to have this load scrutinized, guys, we don't want to have to go through the trouble of being rejected and sorting through this load, I think it's safe to say you're going to see an increase. We saw those photos a few minutes ago, but you'll see an increase in the amount of recyclables, organics, hazardous materials, and other banned items showing up in mixed loads. The Stantec report is a little bit light on discussing the virtues of the FEP WSF, and as a landfill engineer, I would say there are some pretty significant ones as it relates to the operation of the landfill. There were a lot of lessons learned from the operation of the Highway 101 landfill. Certainly not an ideal traditional landfill site, but nonetheless, issues of a very large resident bird population, gulls, that basically migrated from a lake back to the site each day to feed, and it was a significant issue once they closed the site to deal with those birds. Blowing litter as loads from packers were dumped on the tipping face. Invisible, putrescible, rotting material that tends to be very attractive to birds and insects and other nuisance concerns. So this legacy of the Highway 101 landfill really led, I believe, the citizens to demand that the new disposal facility be equipped with some sort of a process to pre-process and stabilize the material before it went to the disposal site, and that ended up being the FEP WSF. And what has it resulted in? And I can say this with some confidence as being someone that's been on a lot of landfills across Canada and other parts of the world. A significant reduced attractiveness to birds. The food isn't there. They're not that interested. Reduced amounts of blowing litter and debris. Because the material is shredded and pre-processed, you don't get what they call it down in the Caribbean, they call them witches' britches. And those are the shopping bags that get caught up in trees. You don't see that because the material has been shredded and processed prior to finding its way out to the disposal site. And because you don't have this visible, putrescible organic material that's very common to raw waste or unprocessed landfill sites, very little attraction of pests and insects. This one kind of struck me as a sensitive engineer, so you'll have to bear with me. In the Stantec report, they attempted to compare operating costs at the RDF, at the landfill component of the Otter Lake site, to other sites in North America. And they selected 11 from across Canada, as well as some in the United States. And there were some themes that emerged about these sites that they selected. Of the 11, 10 of them had reduced liner standards. In fact, the 5 Ontario sites, in terms of the liners, and you can see a selection of liners over here in the corner that I urge you to take a look at before you leave, because it shows a representation of what you have at Otter Lake, and that's the one on the left, and then kind of working down to the one on the right, which is what is permissible in Ontario. They picked 5 Ontario sites with what I call clay-only liner systems. So no engineered components. It's the most modest-looking one there in the group on the right. And that type of liner system hasn't been permitted in Nova Scotia for over 20 years. Well, that represented 5 of the 11 sites that they selected. 4 of the US sites they selected had a single composite liner system. So not basically the one in the middle, not the one on the far left. Again, a lesser degree of engineering and environmental protection. Then there are the mega sites, and these ones kind of caught my attention because they weren't really explicitly identified in the report, but through a little investigation we found out where these sites were, and they were in the United States. 4 of them in the US, and there was actually one in Ontario. And I call them mega sites for a good reason. In comparison to the RDF at Otter Lake, which receives about 140,000 tons of waste per year, these mega sites receive between 700,000 and 2.6 million tons of waste a year. So between 5 and 19 times the waste that arrives at Otter Lake. Not to say that the community wouldn't be thrilled to be receiving 2.6 million tons of waste per year. Wow. And it's really quite an unfair costing exercise to take the Otter Lake RDF with its unique operational requirements and compare them to these very large facilities with very large quantities of tonnage crossing the scale and revenue being generated and combined with lower environmental standards. I'll just quickly reference one landfill that I liked as an engineer. It was the 19 times one. It's called the Rumpke landfill. It's located near Cincinnati. It's the 6th largest landfill in the United States. It has its own Wikipedia page. So if you want to see an interesting landfill that you'd probably just as soon not live very close to, it would be the Rumpke site. The issue of the liner standard. And this is something that I was involved with right back from the beginning of my career, because that's about the time that the liner standard changed in Nova Scotia. So what I've noted is that liner standard that exists here in Nova Scotia, again, we have the representation here on the left, exists right now at 6 landfill sites in Nova Scotia. So Otter Lake plus 5 other regional landfill facilities have been developed, cited, gained community acceptance through that particular liner standard. And it's referred to often as a double composite liner because it's got 2 sheets of HDPE plastic, and sandwiched in between we have a meter of low density or low permeability soil. And this was specified for the first time on one of my projects in 1992, up in Kemptown near Truro. So my recollection in this liner system is that when we went to community meetings and we were able to show that graphic, 1.9 meters thick from the beginning of the engineered works to the top, it had a significant impact on the community. It made them feel confident that their groundwater resources would be protected. And it gained acceptance to the whole idea about hosting a landfill community. And I suspect that was much the case in Otter Lake. Now, what are the implications to reducing this standard? Well, you're not only reneging on a commitment made to the residents that surround the Otter Lake site, but you're in fact reneging on a commitment made to residents in 5 other Nova Scotia communities that have also accepted regional waste management facilities. And I would suspect that the implications of that change will be significant, not just here, but throughout Nova Scotia. The other thing I'd like to point out that Otter Lake probably isn't the best candidate to consider a reduction in a landfill liner standard. And the reason I say that is that unlike other landfills in Nova Scotia, it's situated on fractured bedrock adjacent to a major watercourse. So if you were going to consider the notion of a reduced liner standard, perhaps not the best candidate. Finally, my seventh of 7, relates to this proposed waste resource campus. Campus sounds pretty benign, but what a campus is a centralized location where all your major waste management infrastructure is situated. So the 2 composting facilities that now exist in HRM, one in Dartmouth and one in Goodwood, would be co-located as one big operation at this campus. Also, potentially an anaerobic digester to handle another component of the organic waste stream. Also, a recycling facility and potentially other facilities. In the Stantec report, the campus concept is described in principle, but with very limited additional information. There are no assumptions, no real details about what the site would look like, no conceptual layouts, but they do provide a site size total of about 40 hectares or 100 acres, and they also give a price of about $10 million, described in a very general way. The next component that's a bit troubling to me as an engineer is they put forward an extremely ambitious development schedule. The Stantec report was issued in January 2013. They propose, and I thought this was really something. I don't even think you could get away for this in a non-democracy, is that they propose that in less than 2 years, now remind you, this site is going to have a very large composting operation. All here interested in hosting, put up your hands. So it'll be a very contentious exercise to site this facility. Well, what they've said, in less than 2 years, you could identify that site, you could purchase it, you could design the facilities, you could get it permitted, you could have tendering, you could construct it, all by the end of 2014. And to be gentle, I've summarized that as a lack of appreciation of the issues, because I've been involved in the siting of all sorts of different waste management infrastructure, from the seemingly benign, for instance, transfer stations, to the much more contentious, and that would be landfill sites. And we learned the lessons of being too glib about what it takes to effectively engage the public to establish acceptable waste management facilities in HRM during the 80s and 90s, and I don't think really anybody wants to revisit those days. The bottom line is that when you're trying to site this type of infrastructure, there are significant technical, regulatory, social, and political complexities to get through to get these facilities up and running. It's not a 2-year exercise. So, in summary, we're in the home stretch here, 7 items of concern. Starts off with really an incorrect understanding or definition of what the role of the FEP WSF was. It's wrongly presented in the Stantec document. The characterization of the waste stream. We've seen the conflict. We've seen how Stantec have characterized it, and we've seen how HRM staff characterized it about 2 years ago. The gatekeeper effect. By knowing that your loads are going to be scrutinized on a tip floor, it keeps them honest in terms of making sure that people have an incentive to do the right thing at the point of generation. Not acknowledging the benefits out at the disposal face of what the FEP WSF integrated system achieves. That by putting it through that pre-processing step, by stabilizing the organics, a lot of the traditional issues that you deal with at an unprocessed raw waste landfill are well addressed. My unrepresentative landfills and the Rumpke situation, maybe we could call it, is that if you're going to compare one facility to another, make sure it's representative. And if they have a lower environmental standard and massively larger amounts of waste and revenue, those aren't really good ones to do a cost comparison on. The implications of reducing the liner standard. These were commitments made to communities across Nova Scotia, including the communities that surround Otter Lake. And to step back on that commitment, I think, could have significant impacts on community confidence in terms of environmental protection. And then the campus, 2 years to develop it. Unrealistic and unsubstantiated. So that summarizes my comments. I appreciate your time and your interest, and I'll be around with Ken to answer any questions you might have following the presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Good job. Thank you. Great job, Scott. Thank you for doing that for us. I'm going to go through these last few slides pretty quickly so we can get to questions, but I did promise you that I would bring you up to date on a few things. So the status with council right now. Council has not made any decisions on closing the FEP or WSF or anything like that. There's a bit of confusion in the community about that. What the decision they've made so far is to go to public consultation. They made that commitment on April 23rd. 4 voted against that, as was mentioned before, and the rest of council voted to go ahead with that public consultation. And I should point out at this stage, because I forgot to mention before, it was mentioned before that Russell Walker is one of the members of the CMC. He's not here, but it's because he's the president of UNSM, and there's a big meeting, UNSM meeting down in Yarmouth. And also Councillor Whitman, who voted not to have this go to consultation now. I'm sure he would have been here, but he is also down in Yarmouth at UNSM, Union of Nova Scotia Municipalities. So the question will go to council after the consultation is the way that it stands. So whether or not there would be a decision on the FEP and WSF, as it stands right now, that would be made after the consultation. We were hoping that the consultation with the FEP would not, consultation would not include the FEP and WSF, and that would just be dropped by council, but our efforts to try and achieve that were unsuccessful. We are concerned about the level of information being provided to council. I mentioned it before. I went through that in-camera report, and frankly, I think council's only gotten one side of the story, only half the story. And if I was a councillor, I'd be pretty upset that I'd be trying to answer questions for people when staff didn't provide all of the information. The status with the province, I mentioned on April 23rd, council voted to go to consultation on the FEP and WSF and the rest of the recommendations. And the very next day, there was a letter from the Minister of the Environment, Minister Beliveau. He wrote the mayor saying the FEP and WSF will stay open. And then within a week, we had the leaders of Liberals and Conservatives also wrote the mayor and said they would take the same position if in government. So that's where the status stands with the province. HRM absolutely needs a change to the operating permit to close those facilities, and they absolutely need the approval of the Minister of the Environment to do it. And no matter what you hear on the radio, if you hear somebody from HRM saying something different, the only way they might be thinking that they can get away with that is if they're planning on taking the province to court. And I don't think they'll win. So the public consultation then is coming up. It includes all the Stantec recommendations. Fortunately, with the work of Councillor Rankin, Councillor Adams, and others, and people on the CMC as well, we did get, the consultation does include the commitments to the community and the siting and the history and some of the things that have been mentioned tonight. I can tell you that originally, they were not going to even discuss that at public consultation. They were only going to talk about those recommendations like closing the FEP and the WSF. They weren't going to talk at all about the commitment to the community. But we worked on that and we were able to get that. Inexplicably, the consultation is still going forward with to talk about the closure of the FEP and WSF, even if it's not permitted. And I can tell you that consultation is an expensive process with no chance of it happening. So the summary recommendations then that will go forward, as far as FEP goes, when you're going to the public consultation, it's going to include these recommendations as far as Otter Lake goes. Close the FEP, close the waste stabilization facility, reduce the liners, as Scott said, and increase the height of the landfill to 15 meters higher than it already was planned for, and increase the landfill 17 to 23 years longer than it was planned to be closed. Repurpose the WSF to be a composting facility and have outdoor curing of the compost, which is something you... and build more waste management systems there, as Scott said. So that's the end. I'm getting the hook here. Our recommendation is there's a lot of talk now about reset buttons. I think council should and HRM should push the reset button on this. There's been a lot happening since April 23rd. They've got 3 letters that say that the FEP and WSF are going to stay open until that facility closes in 2023. They should hit reset and step back and drop 10 and punt, I think they used to say. So I just want to say thank you for everyone for coming. We're going to go to questions now. But before we go to questions, I just want you to know that if you're looking for more information, the email address is info@OtterLakeCMC. There's a website, www.otterlakecmc.ca, facebook.com, OtterLakeCMC, and even Twitter, OtterLakeCMC. So get involved, and now we'll be able to take some questions. There's 2 microphones right here, one here, one there. And if you want to step forward, Scott's going to come up. He's the technical guy, and we'll try and answer your questions. Not only brief answers, we're going to please try and limit to questions, not long speeches, because we do want to try and get as much information out as possible. Sir? Can you state your name first?
Tim Backman, I'm in Goodwood. Question just is around the financial end of things. Are there private companies gaining or losing from what's going on here? Is there contracts in place that are going to cost us more? And let's say, is there a fat cat losing weight here that maybe would like to get fatter? So I'm just wondering if there's anything behind the scene financially and any private people that might gain.
Well, maybe Scott might maybe he'll think of something. The only thing that I can think of is that the cost to the municipality coming down by what they're talking about is $10 million in operating costs for the FEP and WSF. But I don't see that sort of thing where there's some hidden factor where somebody's going to make a lot of money because of this. But Scott, is there anything you can think of? No. Okay. Yes, sir. Can you say your name and ask the question?
Yes, good evening. My name is Stephen Taylor, 56 to Neb Crescent, Lower Sackville. I'll answer the gentleman's question in 1 second. I was at every meeting that founded the landfill. Ken was there.
Yeah.
And I'm very disturbed and upset that we're here tonight. I'm in shock that we're here, I'll tell you right now. My biggest message will be for Councillor Adams and Councillor Rankin to take back to council and ask some questions. If this is going to happen, we've been lied and misled. The gentleman asked about the money. You better put a for sale sign on your house now. That's who's going to lose here. If you think for 1 minute, if you don't read these reports, there's a statement in here that garbage trucks will take open waste to the landfill site. I was a waste hauler for 25 years. I still spend my times in office towers and business with a pest management company. People aren't buying into it. HRM has failed on the education. In this report, and in the HRM website today, it says 38% leachate gas in landfills. Well, in Gord Helm's report, it's 20%. They can't even get their own figures straight. They can't get their own numbers straight. I could spend a half hour here telling you the tragedy that's going to come. Well, what HRM doesn't tell you, they collect $12 million a year in tipping fees. $12 million from the businesses and taxpayers that they're not going to give back. That's not in the report. It's not in the report that the compost plants aren't up to speed. Why aren't they closing those? That's not in the report. I can give you case after case what council is doing here. If you don't read between the lines, it's an extension of a landfill, and it's going to be nothing but a dump. And I'm telling you right now, if you trust council and you trust the foolishness that's going on here, I have the only photo that I was there when the Sackville landfill closed to the gate being locked. Because those homes are still in disrepair, what we did to that community.
Steve, do you have a question?
Thank you.
Do you have a question?
The point I make, Ken, if you don't, the questions have to be asked right to council. My question is then, for the 2 councillors that are here, they should go back and have Gord Helm. Will they not ask him to be removed from that department? This is the same gentleman that wanted the Enviro depots closed. So my question is, ask Mayor Savage and council to come out and apologize to the community, stop the foolishness, and move on with the process of educating the people. Thank you.
Hi, can you state your name and ask your question?
My name is Janet Beauchamp, and I live in Timberley. I would like to know, did council give a reason to not provide money, funds that were written in that they could access to have an independent report?
No, they just denied it. Well, I guess they did say that there was already 2 reports and that they didn't think there was any need for a third one. And I don't believe they had any justification for not having an independent one.
Okay, and another quick question. Could Scott do this presentation to council? It would seem that that would solve all the problems.
I guess he would need an invitation, which would be great, and then, of course, that it would be okay with Mirror, so they're the client. Any other questions here? This fellow coming up now. Name, please.
I'm sorry. My name is Dan Helios. I live in Prospect Bay. I just had a question about the whole the campus that they were proposing, the $10 million campus that would be made, and when you blink an eye, it'll be there. Was there a proposed site for that? Was that going to go to Otter Lake, or is that going to be a total not in my backyard, where we can motivate the other people in the other council districts to put a little pressure on their councilors?
Well, they were unclear on the issue of siting as related to the campus and many other features related to the campus. But in terms of where it would be located in the document, it makes reference to a couple candidate locations. It makes a bit of a fleeting but not specific reference to the Otter Lake site. It also talks about lands on the east side of the municipality, but then makes a statement that it wouldn't be cost effective to locate the facility there. So in the end, a particular part or location of the municipality for the campus is not really presented. And I pointed out the efficient and elegant location of the Otter Lake site with respect to Halifax, right off 100 Series Highway, very close to the center of generation. So siting is very important, and it's very contentious. So on that issue of siting, it's very vaguely discussed, and it really was one of my concerns in terms of that whole recommendation.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question. Name first and question.
Scott Guthrie. I born in Lakeside, grew up in Timberley, and now I live in the Prospect area in Brookside. So I'm very familiar with the community, and I take this very, very personal. I guess my first question, I got a couple short ones, and I'll try to keep as brief as possible, is in regards to the public consultation. It's a great thing that they want to have a public consultation, but what onus is on council to take those recommendations from the public consultation when we tell them not going to happen? And are they obligated to listen to the public consultation, or is it just one of those moves that they're going to make to say, yeah, well, we've done our part, but we've decided to go against that recommendation?
Well, it's a really good question. I'll explain how this is going to work. They'll do public consultation. It'll go back through to, there'll be a report written by the company that is hired to do the public consultation, and they're going to have meetings all around HRM. They'll be way up the Eastern Shore asking people if they think they should save money by closing the WSF and FEP in this community. So we have a real problem with that idea. But there'll also be, there's some online stuff that's happening and that sort of thing. But that company, whoever gets chosen, will write a report that will go to staff. It's the same staff that are pushing pretty hard, in my view, to try and make this happen. And then they will write a report, staff will write a report to council with the results on the public consultation. So somebody that may be cynical, if there was anybody around, might think that there's a real opportunity for that to be filtered. So I would say, no, there's no guarantee that the consultation is going to be right to council and be accepted. I think that's fair to say.
Understood. Exactly what I thought. A second part would be, let's say by chance that this they get to shut down what they want to shut down, and then they throw on the 25-year extension. What are the possibilities that that 25-year extension is solely because they know darn well that if they go ahead and do this, there's not another community within Nova Scotia that's going to allow them to go forward again in their backyard?
I guess, I can't speak for councillors, but I guess the scenario here is that if you're a councillor from another area and there's an opportunity to keep this one open for 23 years longer, and that means there's another 23 years it's not going to be in your area, that may seem attractive.
And my last one real quick, I do believe in the initial agreements within the communities that the Otter Lake land was eventually supposed to be deemed as protected parkland after the area was stabilized 20 years after closing. I do believe that the province recently had out a wonderful poll looking for new areas of protected land. So is this not automatically going directly against the proposed new Land Protections Act?
You know what, I don't know the answer to that one. I don't remember it from back in those days. I was very involved, but that's something I'm going to look up. And I know you're on Facebook, and I'll try and answer it for you, okay, Scott?
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Yes, sir? You can state your name and ask.
Yes, my name is Ross Evans, and I live in the first house in the Pockwalk Road. It so happens the 9 Mile River starts in my backyard in a little lake called Bartlett's Lake. I have been a member of the Watershed Advisory Board, in fact, a founding member, 15 years ago. And I'm very concerned about the impact of reducing the lining on the 9 Mile River.
Right.
I think that's a bad idea because you can't go back. The other thing...
Do you have a question?
Well, just one question, yes.
Okay.
Is the cost of the lawsuit, which the city will lose, and the compensation that they're going to end up paying to the community as they did in Sackville, is that going to negate any savings?
Well, it's a somewhat rhetorical question, but I think it's a very, very valid concern that those are things that are not factored into that Stantec report, that's for sure.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. Yes, sir?
Bill, everybody should be clapping in the room
Yeah.
for you.
My name is Dennis Wright. I'm from Beachville. Quickly, I hear a lot of talk about education tonight, so I wanted to thank the employees from the landfill for bringing the word to the community so I could find out about this. I think they've done a great job of being involved in spreading the word. And quickly, I have a couple quick questions. One, if HRM turns the landfill into a dump, won't this cause our property values to go down in the surrounding communities?
Well, I mean, I don't know for sure, but it's pretty easy to speculate that living near a landfill, and if there's odors and that sort of thing, that it's not as attractive to home buyers.
So that would lead me to my number 2 question, and it kind of touches back to what was on the screen earlier. I got to bring back the hell. Who the hell would want to live in an area next to an open dump?
All right. And yes, your name and then your question, please.
Joan Alexander from Harrodsville. I'm just wondering if you do close the FEP, what's going to happen to all the haz waste that goes into the landfill? Is there any statistics on the amounts of haz waste?
Well, the Stantec report does point out that most Nova Scotians, including folks here in HRM, now have access to a place to take their haz waste. It's not...
Excuse me, I'd like to intervene.
No,
because-
please let him answer the question,
Sorry.
okay?
So they mention that, but no, you're right, that the FEP, not only does it allow you to intercept recyclables and organics, but everything else that's banned from landfill, including haz waste. And at the Otter Lake site, they keep statistics on the amount of material that they intercept on the tip floor that otherwise would have gone to the disposal site. And that is all part of meeting the province's material bans. And I would suggest that it's an important part of the overall FEP operation, for sure.
I think it's an extremely big point because there's many owners within HRM that do not have the accessible means to transport their haz waste to these locations. So therefore, they're getting wrapped in blankets or they're getting thrown in the woods, and ignorance is bliss. And one more comment, there's no cost on perfection. I don't believe you should go backwards with this. Thank you.
Okay.
Your name, please, and the question.
I'm David Wimberly, and I was one of the founding members, shall we say, of the Community Stakeholder Committee. Very, very active on it, and a lot of other groups that helped found this. And I was also on the group that did the siting process. I want to say, before we cited this, we after we had the strategy, we demanded a provision be in the HRM Act to be added that would guarantee that the strategy itself would be actually enacted and adhered to before we'd actually agree to cite it. So what's happening now is a great betrayal to all of us that worked on this, because we staked ourselves as citizens on this. And I'm wanting to know how we get that provision put back into the HRM Act and it be brought out and that it gives an ongoing protection. And that's the first question.
Well, that's a good question too, David, and it's something that actually I have on my to-do list to check out because it's been brought up by some others as well.
The second is how do we actually get a public process that is not biased? This system comes out with a assumption that we're going to just comment on the Stantec report, which is biased by the terms of reference, it's biased by the people doing it, it's biased by the city manager having his own biases, and I wish he would go back to Toronto with his biases. The Community Stakeholder Committee was based on this national roundtable that was a consensus building process. And that's why we actually did this whole process in less than that 2 years timetable and cited it because we built consensus and trust, which is now being destroyed. And so the second question is, how do we actually get a consensus building and trust building and a citizen-led process to actually look at how we can go further ahead?
So David, and that's going to be the final question because there's somebody waiting there. So, but I think it's valid. You're absolutely right. It was based on consensus back then, and you've probably noted that the Minister of the Environment, Sterling Beliveau, said that if there are any changes to be made at the Otter Lake facility in 2023, it would require a similar consultation program as to the one that established the site in the first place. And my reading of that, and I would certainly be pushing for that, it would be a completely consensus-based, community-based, non-biased approach as was done before.
And I do want to make one more point, and I believe that the biggest problem with the Stantec report is it doesn't focus at the beginning, the foundation of our system, which was source separation. We need to go back and perfect the source separation. That's why we put in these systems at the landfill in the first place, to protect from people who weren't source separating. How do we get that back in the process? Because that's the key. And I want to say that every person here should write and say to their counselors and to HR and to the province that we want that source separation process to be actually perfected so we get to zero waste.
Okay, thanks, David.
Thank you.
And thanks for that, David. You know, one thing that it did occur to me when I was looking at Scott's graph with that flat line that goes across, and Gord Helm's pictures of all of this material coming into the front-end processing facility, is that if you've got this going on, and if in 2000 there was a compelling need to have a front-end processing facility, and you have the same material coming in 2012, and you have the same amount of material coming in 2012, why the heck are you talking about closing these facilities now that were so important to be handling the same situation 12 years ago? So what's your question and your name and question?
My name is Sherry Costa. I live in Hatchet Lake. Couple of things. One question that I have is further to David's with regards to the community engagement. I'd like to know if in advance we as a community could have some type of terms of reference for what we see as public engagement and come to an agreement with HRM City Council as to what they see as public engagement. They may not be the same thing. And also further to what David had said with regards to that front-end processing and us being able to determine what's going into the waste, it all starts with us as well. We have to look at what we are doing that is contributing. I know we don't want this change to happen, but we also have to look at when we're getting rid of our disposals and recyclables, are we really cycling it the way we should be and putting things where they should be? Because I know that for myself, I don't often do that.
Thank you very much for that question. And I just like to point out that when you're talking about helping to assist with the terms of reference of the public consultation, on February 5th, Council, and I believe Councillor Rankin ensured that this was in the motion, they directed staff to go and meet with the Community Monitoring Committee to develop the terms of reference for the consultation. And they did not. Staff did not come and meet with the CMC. In fact, the CAO, Richard Butts, said, "Why would we go out and speak with a panel of non-experts?" he said. And that was the reason why he felt it was unnecessary. So he didn't follow that direction, and staff didn't come out and talk to the CMC. And CMC had to bully our ways, really, elbow our way, I should say. We leave the bullying to others, but we had to elbow our way into the Environmental and Sustainability Standing Committee in order to try and press for changes to the consultation plan. So it's been hard to have some input, and we don't expect, with the level of cooperation that we're seeing, that there's going to be much opportunity to do it. But we're going to continue trying. And I can tell you, when you have a show of support like this from the community, it's going to make people stand up and take notice that the CMC is a force, and the community is a force that they have to be reckoned with. Yes, sir.
Tim Backman again in Goodwood. I live across the street from the C&D facility. And every couple of years, they come up with this proposal to increase their size, to get more zoning, and so on. So, as Otter Lake stays as it is, and the city grows, and there's all this development happening, and we should expect more garbage. Should we expect facilities like Goodwood to double in size, triple in size?
Well, I really wouldn't expect 2 or 3 times the size of anything in given growth rates. But
we got a Larry Utech Boulevard out there that has roads going into the woods.
Right.
So they're expecting growth.
No, that's another issue. But I mean, 2 or 3 times is pretty large. I wouldn't expect that. No. Okay. Your name and question, please.
Yeah, Mike Lamplow, Whites Lake. Like many people here, I was involved with the CSC and Probe, mid-90s. Interesting times. Don't want to go there again. In fact, I'm really not sure if I'm more disappointed or mad that this meeting had to be called, but I thank you all for doing it and getting the information out to everybody. I'm pretty sure from what I've heard tonight and the support we have here that at the end of the day, this isn't going to happen. It can be maybe painful, but I'm pretty sure this isn't going to change. But in the interim, my question is, can we make council, or maybe not council, staff a little more uncomfortable and retain some legal representation for the CMC to basically tell them really that you should have given the $20,000, you should have disposal access to your $65,000. I think maybe a little bit of a legal poke and that they're not even coming along with that basic funding, which you have a complete right to. As soon as they get that being challenged, they could really start poking them. But I think I'm feeling really good, and thank you very much for having this meeting. But it's disappointing we've had to have it.
Thanks, Mike, and we'll take that under advisement. That's a good suggestion. Yes, ma'am, and if you could say your name.
I'll be quick. Kathy Oakley, I live in Prospect. And I think I heard you say that there's a pretty good legal case for them not being able to shut down these facilities. But there are going to be other consultative meetings, and there might be other communities that say, sure, let's save the money. And there just might be a new Nova Scotia Minister of the Environment. If that's the case, do we still have a legal leg to stand on? I guess I'm saying, how strong is our case regardless of who's the Minister of the Environment and what the other communities say about our situation here?
I think the best I can do is just tell you how I see it, and I'm not a lawyer either, so I should be careful, but I'm rarely am. So, but anyways, the way I see it is, I mean, I was really, I don't know about you, Scott, but I was really surprised when I read the in-camera staff report that just sort of flippantly in one paragraph said, well, if there's a change that's needed with the operating permit, well, we'll just do that because we do it all the time, you know, that sort of thing. Anybody, and Stantec, I think, is guilty of this as well. Anybody with a passing knowledge of waste management in Nova Scotia and anywhere else in Canada recognizes that the Minister of the Environment has the ultimate responsibility and authority. And you are not going to get things done if the Minister of the Environment doesn't want it to happen. And so the situation we have right now is the existing Minister of the Environment has been crystal clear. He couldn't have been clearer. And the Premier spoke to reporters about it when the letter was done, saying that this just would not be allowed. So that's very, very clear. And then the leaders of the other two parties came forward within a week, and they said, we wouldn't allow it either. So I mentioned this to somebody, and they said, well, there's a lot of ifs in there. This happened today in a conversation. There's a lot of ifs, and nothing is absolutely 100% guaranteed. And I think that's probably true, but you can't get much more assurance than we already have that those facilities just are not going to go away, and they will stay there until the landfill closes in 2023. But we should be very, very vigilant.
Even if there's an election and a new Minister of the Environment?
Well, if the leaders stick to the letters, you know, what they've committed to in the letters, and I don't see any reason why, I would expect that they would. And of course, if there is a change in government, or if we get a new Minister of the Environment, we should be right on top of them to remind them of these promises. That doesn't mean this is over, though, because there is a chance. And that means that the community here, you know, all the people that have come out, Elizabeth said earlier, when the consultation starts, please come out to it, and we have to make sure. We just have to make sure.
Should we write our MLAs?
That's not a bad idea, and you might want to also write to councillors. Now, I would say that we've got a couple of councillors here, at least, that are probably getting enough mail, and their email boxes don't have to be flooded. But it might not be a bad idea to write to some other ones, because they all have votes, and there's a mayor as well, and you know, it is democracy, right? The one thing I'd say is be respectful. Yes. Recognize that council has not made a decision yet. And if you want them to vote the way you want them to vote, if you expect them to vote the way you want them to vote, then it's a lot better to be just firm in telling them what you expect, but be respectful when you do it. I've been told by some of the councillors they've received some nasty emails, and that's not a good way to win somebody over.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, save the nasty ones until they vote the wrong way. Any other questions? Yes?
My name's Kristen, and I'm from Eastover. I guess my question is for the community. If these public consultation, if the design is to go to other communities, I would question or ask everyone to attend the meetings elsewhere as well. I think it needs to be a balanced, we need to have a voice in the other communities as well. And my husband and I have said one of us will be at the meetings in other communities, and I think it's really important for the community members to do that. And so I ask you all to find out where the different public consultation meetings are, if it's not reset, and to attend them elsewhere as well.
That's a really good idea. That's a really good idea, and I can tell you that during the time when this waste facility at Otter Lake was being established, you know, people came from Sackville and other communities and said, and helped to try and make sure those assurances, those commitments were in place, even though it wasn't going in their yard, or in their backyard, as is often said. So that's a good idea. And I'll tell you one other tip that Jeff Regan told me, and this is a fantastic idea. If you're living in this area, you already know that Councillor Rankin and Councillor Adams are very supportive of keeping things in place, and they've been very strong leaders on this, and they deserve a round of applause for that, frankly. But councillors listen to their own constituents more than others. So some councillors have said they get so many emails and they see it's not from their area and they don't even read them. Sometimes they just delete them. And they probably don't carry as much weight. So Jeff Regan had this great idea at the COCO meeting, and he said, if you know people in other parts of the municipality, friends, family, whatever, ask them to write letters to their councillor and say, I'm a constituent and I want that my municipality to keep its commitments to the people around the Otter Lake landfill. John?
I'm John Cascadden. I live in the McDonald Lake subdivision in Hatchet Lake area. It seems to me that there's a fundamental law being broken here, that if I counsel someone to break the law, I believe someone comes up and taps on my shoulder and says, you can't do that. Yet the Stantec report actually effectively tells HRM and tries to influence the public that we can flaunt the provincial regulations and thus break the law in the process. How do they get away with this?
Well, I guess you can make recommendations. I don't know. Maybe the law has to be broken, John. I don't know. That's. Do you have? I see your point. Do you have? Can I say maybe a more concrete question?
Sure. Okay. My other concrete question is: I see all the people that have come here who are looking to get more information and make an informed decision. And I know we have 2 councillors that are sitting here, and we know that a couple others are away. But my question is, are there any of the other councillors that voted affirmative to move forward with the actual public consultation? Are they here to gather any additional information so that they can make a better informed decision than they did in the past?
I haven't seen any, but doesn't mean there aren't any. But well, they know. This has been no secret, but they weren't explicitly invited. There's no secret that there was a meeting.
Oh well, they read Facebook, and
Yeah.
I put out 65 emails to
They
the
weren't ready?
others,
Oh.
and only got 3 responses back that they had acknowledged that they'd received emails.
Okay, I'm told they were invited, John. So, anybody else? Any other questions?
Scott Guthrie, just one more quick question. I spend my mornings every morning just based on what I do for work on the Nova Scotia Tender website, and I was wondering if council could, if we could go to council and ask them the question, A, I know it's already been asked, why was the tender for public consultation put out before it was passed in legislature? And 2, where did it go? Because I'm looking to see who was awarded the tender, and it is no longer available on the site, and it's very unusual that a government tender that involves the public would be removed without any acknowledgement. It should be canceled and published as canceled.
Yeah, that is a weird thing, Scott. You're right. The tender documents normally stay on there, and there's some follow-up so people can track it. And the thing is, it is on there, because if you go to the link I put on Facebook, you can see it, but there's no way of seeing that it's there if you're on the tender site. So maybe one of the councillors could ask staff about that, because it does seem to have been pulled off when usually it would stay there, and then there would be a track record of who gets awarded, who it's awarded to, what the costs are, and that sort of thing, right? So
Yes.
we'll try
Thank
to
you.
follow up. Okay, listen, folks, there's nobody else at the microphones, and it's not very often that you finish a community meeting early, and I'm sure it has something to do with hockey, or for at least half of you. But just before I let you go, can I just say one thing? Is the CMC really needs your support, and we really appreciate the fact that so many people have come out today, but we need your continued support. If we're going to have some sort of consultations, I hope that the consultations won't be about an FEP and WSF, that there'll be some common sense applied and that they'll be pulled out. But there will be public consultation. And we need to make sure that we get our message out, whether it is to ensure that the FEP and WSF remain, or if we're not talking about that, some people here have mentioned that there's a long way to go on source separation. And we should be able to, we can go out and we can try and build a better waste management system and not just a cheaper one. Thanks very much. Drive safely and have fun watching the hockey.
You did a great job in the presentation. It really was fantastic. I'm not blown away. I thought it was really, really good. Yeah.